كتير.
ربنا معاك. دي بنتك؟
نيكول.
معقولة؟ معقولة؟
لسه عملتها.
Yeah. Good to see you, Nicole. God bless you, sweetie.
بيوتك تشرفنا.
خدها كلها. So you are kind of familiar with Orthodoxy, or she is not Orthodox?
She actually is not Orthodox, but I'm fairly familiar with Orthodoxy.
Okay. Okay.
So if you could, just for the record here, give me your name and just give permission for me to interview you.
Okay. My name is Antonious Henein. Do you want me to spell that?
Yes, please do.
Antonious, Antonious, Henein, Henein. And you can interview me, you can do whatever you want.
Thank you very much. I was very impressed with what a beautiful worship space this is. And I wonder, even though this is a huge subject, if you could talk a little bit about the role of icons and of visual images for people who are worshiping.
Okay.
And maybe there's even a particular image or icon you would like to point to. But,
sure. In general, we feel that the atmosphere in which a person exists will influence him in a certain way, and this is why the architecture of the churches developed in such a way. And if we can, in very brief, say that a dome usually represents heaven being circular, which means eternal, since a circle doesn't have a start and an end. So a dome is always symbolic of the heavens, that is unlimited, and a square is always representing earth, since we usually refer to earth as from east to west and from north to south, the four corners of the earth. So, and this is why the building of a church is a square with a dome above it, which means that heavens and earth were united, which is what we believe that Christ has done, reconciled heaven and earth. That is, if we look at the elevation of the church, a dome over a rectangle. But at the same time, if we look at the plan, again, the same thing, there is an apse or a niche at the east of the church that is attached to the body of the church that is a square. So again, it's the same idea, heaven and earth. And this is why this is the most sacred place of the church. And then this is the rest of the church, where this is representing the presence of God with his people, which is an idea that started by the tabernacle in the Old Testament being existing within the tents of the people, to tell them that God is dwelling amongst them. So this is the architecture of the church in very brief. Icons. In general, an icon is expressing with lines, shapes, and colors what is represented to the people in letters, words, and sentences, and paragraphs. And so people who cannot read can look at an icon and get from the colors and lines what an educated person can get from a book. So, and this is why an icon has to follow a certain grammar and a certain way of telling the people something. It's not just a beautiful image, it's more than that. In every icon there are some elements that if we look at them, we can read few things from that. To arrange the icons in the building of the church it also has a certain rule that means something. Of course, we cannot talk about many of them, but if we look at the main part, which is the royal door, what we call the royal door, with
You can keep talking,
with
I'm just going to
yeah,
pan over to that.
the royal door, which is the central door here, with the two icons to the left and to the right. Actually, the icon of the Holy Virgin Mary carrying on her lap or on her shoulder Christ born of her is representing the first coming of Christ in the flesh. And then on the other side, Christ seated on his royal throne is representing his second coming to judge the whole world. So, and between the two comings of Christ, the first coming that happened 2,000 years ago and the second coming that will happen at the end of time, in between the two comings of the Christ, we say that Christ is ever existing with his people on the altar by his body and his blood. So this is his first coming, his second coming, and his existence with us between the two comings.
Now, I know a very famous artist has done a lot of these, and
Yes.
you referred to the fact that there are some rules about the form itself.
Yes.
To what extent are these replicas of other icons in churches in Egypt? And how important is it that these icons, in a sense, become a bridge for people who are worshiping between this country and the home country? Maybe I'm mixing several questions together there.
Well, the question is very difficult to answer because we have to go through some of the history of Egypt. If you are talking specifically about Egypt, for a long time in the history of the church in Egypt, and because of two major factors. Number one, Islam that is against any pictures, making any pictures or statues, that forced the church sometime not to use icons. And also because of the economical and financial ability of the church at certain times not to make icons. An icon like this will take an iconographer maybe a month to work on it. And so it's expensive. It's not very easy to do unless you can afford that. For these two factors, being poor at certain periods of time of the history of the church and being oppressed by Islam at certain other times, icons were not developed in Egypt as it should have. Okay, actually, in the recent history of Egypt, we didn't have much of icons produced in the last few centuries, until this famous iconographer whose name is Isaac Fanous went to France and studied under a very famous Russian iconographer whose name is Ouspensky, and came back to Egypt and started to revive this. So it's a revival of an ancient tradition that for some time disappeared. Okay. Of course, you can see a gap. If you compare an icon of the Virgin Mary with a very ancient one, there is a gap between them. You cannot see that this is a direct evolution of the ancient one. Even though you can see the elements, the essential elements are still there, but you cannot relate them immediately. The colors started to develop in a different way, the shape and so forth. Probably he had some influence from Russian iconography or let me call it Byzantine iconography, because he studied under Ouspensky, but keeping the Coptic style to some extent, the Egyptian style, with some influence from what he was taught by Ouspensky at that time.
So are there unique elements to the Coptic iconography that would be different, say, from Russian or Greek?
Yes, some. For example, in Russian icons, the person is usually thin and tall. In the Copts, he's shorter and fatter, if you can.
Does that simply reflect the culture and the people?
Yes. Well, the ancient pharaonic art was supposed to develop into the Christian art, and it did in the first few centuries until after Islam came, and this kind of stopped at a certain period of time. Okay, so the roots of the Coptic iconography as shapes, as art, comes from the pharaonic art, while the roots of the Byzantine iconography comes from ancient Greek art rather than ancient Egyptian art. So there is some differences. Of course, a person who is trained into art can see more than that into them, can see the differences. However, there is kind of amalgamation of the two in the contemporary Coptic art. It's because of the influence of the Russian school on the Coptic art now.
Recently, I interviewed a Buddhist nun, and I was asking her about the image of the Buddha. And we were actually reflecting on the fact that some images of the Buddha look like they are from Taiwan with Chinese influence, some more Indian, some more Thailand or Cambodian and so forth. And she said, well, in the American context, maybe the Buddha will start looking like an Anglo-American. Okay, my question with that as a kind of framework is, do you see within the American context the icons evolving in terms of shape and form, or even maybe their dimensionality, or do you think that it's important that they remain in the form that they are in, and that they don't evolve, because to evolve would lose something in that process?
That's exactly the question. If evolving will make it lose something, then we better be careful. But we are not against icons being evolved without losing the main thing. For example, in the icon, I am not interested into revealing the beauty of the flesh. For example, the Virgin Mary. It's not important for me to have a picture, an icon of the Virgin Mary with blue eyes and rosy cheeks and red lips, because this is the flesh beauty that is not my concern. So, but a face that is full of peace and serenity and calmness is more important. Okay, whether now I do this in dark skin being Egyptian or lighter skin being Anglo-Saxon, that is not very essential. It's not the important thing. But the important thing is that the concentration will not be on the flesh beauty, rather on the spiritual beauty. And this is where we differ from the Italian art, for example. You look at a picture of a Virgin Mary that comes from Rome, and she's blonde and so beautiful in the flesh, but that's the extent of it. So we say, no, that's not what I want to put in the icon.
Let me ask a final question, because I'm taking everybody's time here.
That's okay.
Could you describe your congregation? For example, what percentage of your congregation would be immigrants? What percentage might be born here? What percentage are non-Egyptians? And if so, why are they coming here? Also, a little bit about the age. These are all sort of questions about the demography of your congregation.
Well, the spectrum is very wide. So if you are talking about age, we have newborns and we have 100 years old people in the congregation. And of course, the bell shape curve is there. If you are talking about immigrants versus newborn, the majority of the older people are immigrants. The majority of the younger people are born in America, are born here. So if I would give a percentage, maybe 50-50, maybe 50%. If I look at any family of 50 years old parents and maybe 20 years old children of these parents, if the two parents have two children, most probably the two parents are immigrants and the two children were born here. So it's like that. For non-Egyptians that joined the church, very small percentage, and usually only through marriage, usually. Very few that were interested into Orthodoxy and contacted the church and showed their interest and then became members of the church. Most of them, it didn't happen that way. It happened that some of the Egyptians or Coptic people met an American or other nationality and got interested into marrying. And of course, in our church, we don't allow inter-religious or inter-denominational marriages. So the other person has to join the church to be able to marry within the church. But this is very small percentage.
Final question. I guess I said that was the last, but I have one more. When you think about the future of the Coptic Church in Los Angeles, 100 years from now, do you think that the church will be even more vital than it is now, or do you think the process of assimilation will take the new generation away from the church?
Good question. I don't know. I cannot predict because of few things. Unless we become very sensitive about how to keep our young generation within the church, we will lose many of them. We have a language problem that we are struggling with. We have a publication problem. We don't have enough books written in English, in proper English, that will be readable by... I can write in English, but I'm sure the people who are educated here in America will not like my writing, my style. So we have to do something about that, about providing them with what they need to stay connected with the church. But on the other hand, will the church continue to exist or will be assimilated? It will depend also on some political factors. For example, is the flux of new immigrants going to continue, or will it stop at a certain time? If the economy in Egypt becomes better, maybe the people will not think of immigrating. If the political relations between Egypt and America improves or become worse, that will affect the flux of people coming from Egypt. And I cannot predict how this will happen. But we definitely need to do a lot of work to keep our people in the church.
Thank you.
You're welcome.